In December 2020, 21-year-old college student Jason Landry sets out to visit his parents. It's a route he's driven many times before, but this time, everything is different. Jason never arrives home. All that's found are his car, his personal belongings, and even his clothes. Jason's disappearance marks the beginning of an investigation into a missing person case that couldn't be more mysterious. Ruperswil is located in Switzerland, west of Zurich. In 2015, about 4,000 people lived there. Many families have lived there for years. The children play in the same clubs, and people run into each other while shopping or on the way to school. There haven't been any serious crimes here in a long time. The Schauer family also lives in Ruperswil. 48-year-old Carla Schauer lives there with her two sons. Dion is 19 years old. His younger brother Devin is 13. Carla's partner, Georg Metger, also lives in the house. On the morning of December 21, 2015, Dion's 21-year-old girlfriend Simona was also in the house. As she often did, she had spent the night at her boyfriend's house. Simona has a very good relationship with her own family. Since her father's death, she has been particularly close to her two brothers. The three are very close, and her brother later describes them, in essence, as a sort of three musketeers. The Schauer family is well liked. There is no evidence that they had any enemies or that anyone would have wanted to harm them. For Georg Metger, December 21, 2015, begins at first like any ordinary morning. It is cold and still dark when Georg gets up that morning. He takes a shower, eats breakfast, and makes Carla a cup of coffee. He does this often. He likes to bring her the first cup of coffee in bed in the morning because she really appreciates this small gesture. Afterward, he says goodbye to her, gives her a kiss, and sets off for work, which is about half an hour away. As he leaves the house, he doesn't notice that someone is apparently already nearby. He also plans to go skiing in Davos with two colleagues that day. Hours later, as Georg sits with his colleagues in the gondola heading up to the Visfløyjoch, one of the men receives a message from his wife. It says there's a fire in Ruperswil, and black clouds of smoke are reportedly visible over the town. At that moment, it's not yet clear to Georg which house is being referred to, nor does he realize that the fire broke out on the same street where he had brought Carla coffee in bed that morning. On the morning of December 21, 2015, the Schauer family's house is being watched. A stranger is hiding in the dark, waiting for Georg Metger to leave the house. Shortly afterward, the man rings the family's doorbell. He introduces himself as the school psychologist at Devin's school. To appear credible, he has a fake business card and a fake letter with him. He claims that Devin is involved in a serious bullying incident and that a classmate took her own life as a result of this bullying. This story comes as a shock to Carla. Carla lets him into the house. She wakes Devin so he can speak with the supposed school psychologist. At first, it does indeed seem to be only a conversation, but after a few minutes, the man pulls out a knife and threatens Devin. He forces Carla to wake up Dion and Simona as well. He ties up and gags the three of them and then demands money from Carla. He tells her to withdraw money from the bank. Supposedly, there's an accomplice watching them on the way. If she acts suspiciously or calls for help, he'll harm her children. Carla doesn't know that this accomplice doesn't actually exist. The perpetrator takes a photo of her and pretends to send the picture to the accomplice. Carla first drives to an ATM in Lenzburg and withdraws 1,000 Swiss francs there. Later, she goes to the teller window at a bank branch in Wildeck and withdraws another 9,850 Swiss francs. The bank's surveillance footage shows that Carla appears tense and frightened. Afterward, Carla returns to the house and hands over the money. She, too, is then tied up and gagged. The perpetrator then abuses Devon and films the act with his cell phone. A total of 8 videos are recorded in which Devon's fear of death is clearly visible. Exactly what happens next in the family's home cannot be reconstructed in full detail later on. The only certainty is that all 4 victims are murdered with a knife. The first victim is believed to have been 19-year-old Dion. He had apparently managed to free himself from his bonds beforehand. Afterward, Carla, Simona, and Devon are also killed. The perpetrator then spreads accelerant and sets the house on fire. He intends to destroy his evidence and manages to leave the house undetected. At 11:20 a.m., an emergency call is received. The initial report is of a house fire in Ruperswil. To the fire department, this initially sounds like a routine call rather than an incident involving multiple fatalities. When the emergency crews arrive at the house, they are informed that people are still missing. From the outside, it is initially impossible to tell what has happened inside the house. The breathing apparatus teams enter the house and make their way up to the first floor. There, they find the lifeless residents. It quickly becomes clear that the 4 people did not die in the fire. The bodies show numerous stab and cut wounds. It is later determined that the victims had been bound. At this point, Georg Metger is in Davos with 2 colleagues, while one of his colleagues receives the news of the fire from his wife. Shortly afterward, Carla's father calls Georg. He says, "Georg, you should come home. Your house is on fire." On the drive back to Ruperswil, Georg initially suspects an accident. He wonders if he might have overlooked a candle or if something else in the house could have started the fire. Then, his worst fear is confirmed, and he learns that 4 bodies have been found in the house. On the way to the police station, he finally receives the information that the fire was not the cause of death. For Georg, his world comes crashing down at that moment. After the 4 bodies were found, crime scene investigators and forensic experts were immediately called in. It quickly became clear that the fire had been set deliberately to destroy evidence. At first, it seemed as though the perpetrator had succeeded. Most of the rooms were destroyed, and important items were completely burned or at least damaged. Nevertheless, they eventually managed to secure DNA and fingerprints that presumably belonged to the perpetrator. However, an initial comparison yields no match. The investigators therefore begin by taking a closer look at the family's social circle. In most homicide cases, the perpetrator comes from the victim's immediate circle. A completely unknown perpetrator is rare. That is why Georg Metger quickly becomes the focus of the investigators' attention. He is the family's sole survivor. For the investigators, it therefore makes sense to scrutinize him more closely. For Georg, this is almost unbearable. Not only has he just lost his entire family, but now he is also being treated as a possible suspect. At the crime scene, he is first taken to a police car and questioned. Later, he has to go to the police station. There, he is required to hand over his clothes and cell phone. Among other things, his fingernails are examined for traces of soot. Georg's family is also investigated. His ex-wife and children must also give statements at the station. The situation is particularly distressing for Georg's youngest son. He keeps thinking that the 4th victim is his father. When Georg is finally allowed to leave the station, he initially thinks he is no longer the focus of the investigation. Later, upon reviewing the case files, he receives 4 full folders concerning only him. In them, he finds not only the transcripts of his statements, but also evidence of phone and email surveillance. Apparently, a tracking device has even been attached to his car. At the same time, the crime is causing a huge stir in the media. Numerous reporters arrive in town and speak with residents. People are unsettled and deeply afraid that the perpetrator might be from the town and could strike again. The pressure on the police and the district attorney's office is therefore enormous. After the first few days, however, investigators are forced to face the sobering reality that the search for the perpetrator will take longer and that there will be no quick resolution. A special task force is formed. The team is one of the largest investigative units the canton of Aargau has ever seen. The police check with the tax authorities and the school, examine the victim's social circles, and search for the murder weapon. All trash containers in the village are searched. About 50 police officers walk side by side across fields to find any items that may have been discarded. One of the most important leads is Carla's bank withdrawals. Georg barely recognizes her in the bank's surveillance footage because she looks so stressed and frightened there. Using flyers and images from the surveillance cameras, the police try to find witnesses. But even these leads do not initially point to the perpetrator. In February 2016, a reward of 100,000 Swiss francs is offered, one of the highest rewards in Swiss criminal history. Swiss investigators collaborate with profilers and experts from across Europe. The evidence eventually points more and more strongly to the fact that the perpetrator has no prior criminal record. Cell phone data is also repeatedly cited later as a possible lead in the investigation. Media reports suggest that so-called cell tower searches may have played a role. This involves checking which cell phones connected to cell towers near the crime scene during a specific time period. Officially, however, law enforcement agencies have not disclosed to this day exactly how they proceeded. They justify this by stating that such methods are also used in other investigations and should not be made public. After several months, investigators finally identified a specific suspect. They kept him under surveillance for 72 hours before making their move. On May 12, 2016, just under 5 months after the crime, the police took action. They arrested a man at a Starbucks location in Aarau. He was alone and offered no resistance. It is only when they examine him more closely that the investigators can grasp the full extent of his crime. The man arrested is Thomas N. He is 33 years old, has no prior criminal record, and lives in Ruperswil, only about 500 meters from the Schauer family's home. He lives with his mother. His father passed away a few years ago. Thomas hardly stands out to others. People who know him describe him as polite, friendly, and reserved. He is active in the local soccer club where he coaches the junior team. It came as a great surprise to the investigators themselves when they came across Thomas. A man with no criminal record who is involved in community activities is an unusual suspect. Georg Metter, too, was startled when he first saw Thomas. He simply comes across as very calm, self-assured, and determined, downright trustworthy. It is precisely this that allows him to convincingly play his false role on the morning of December 21st. Thomas tells his mother and those around him that he is studying medicine. In fact, he has started and dropped out of several degree programs. Among other things, he lives off his grandmother's inheritance, which is slowly running out. According to later reports, he frequently spends his days in cafes and online. Thomas is attracted to young men. He does not seek help. This is how Devon eventually caught his eye. There is no personal relationship between the victims and the perpetrator. Thomas observes the family and plans the crime. In addition to the sexual motive, money also plays a role. After the crime, Thomas returns to his own home. According to later accounts, he takes a shower, and when he hears that a house is on fire in the neighborhood, he goes to the scene and mingles with the onlookers. He observes everything very closely while the fire department, police, and forensic investigators are at work. In the afternoon, he goes for a walk with his mother and the dogs. In the evening, he drives to the casino in Zurich with 2 friends. There, he spends part of the extorted money. With the remaining money, he later buys, among other things, dog food and brand-name clothing. He also books a ski vacation and a trip to Paris for his mother for her 60th birthday. On the surface, it appears as though his life is continuing as normal. At the same time, he repeatedly watches the videos he recorded during the crime. Later, even during practice with the youth soccer team, he talks to others about the murder case. No one suspects at this point that he himself is the perpetrator. At the press conference following his arrest, it is announced that Thomas N. has made a full confession. Investigators believe it is highly likely that he acted alone. During house searches, authorities also find evidence suggesting that Thomas may have been planning further crimes. Among other items, they seize a backpack containing an old military pistol, prepared ropes, cable ties, and duct tape. Investigators also found notes and information regarding potential additional victims in the area. According to later reports, Thomas N. had targeted at least 2 other families. The day before his arrest, he is said to have already been standing in front of another family's home with a backpack and similar tools of the crime. The district attorney's office later stated, "We must assume that the perpetrator had specifically planned further similar crimes and would have carried them out. This was prevented in time thanks to his arrest." Thus, the arrest not only solved a quadruple murder, but may also have prevented further crimes. On September 7, 2017, the District Attorney's Office files charges against Thomas N. The trial begins on March 13, 2018. Thomas is brought to the trial in an unmarked police car with tinted windows. As the presiding judge opens the proceedings, he strikes the gavel 4 times. The courtroom falls silent. Later, several people present describe this moment as particularly harrowing. On this day, each strike also represents one of the victims: Carla, Dion, Devin, and Simone. Thomas is 35 years old at this time. Outwardly, he does not fit the image many would have expected of a quadruple murderer. He sits in the courtroom with his head bowed, frequently looking down at the table, and answers questions clearly and matter-of-factly. The prosecution accuses Thomas of a long list of serious crimes. These include multiple counts of murder, extortion with the intent to rob, false imprisonment, hostage-taking, abuse, arson, forgery, and criminal preparatory acts. Thomas N. has already confessed. The trial, therefore, centers on the question of how dangerous he remains and whether he will be subject to additional preventive detention following his life sentence. 2 independent psychiatric evaluations were conducted prior to the trial. One diagnosed him with narcissistic personality disorder, the other with obsessive-compulsive personality disorder. Both evaluations concluded that he is fully criminally responsible. Furthermore, both experts see a high risk of recidivism. For the prosecution, it is therefore clear that Thomas must not be released after a specific period of imprisonment. In Switzerland, a life sentence does not automatically mean that an offender remains in prison until his death. After a certain minimum period, a review can be conducted to determine whether release is possible. Detention is therefore an additional safeguard. It is intended to prevent an offender from being released if he continues to pose a significant danger. Among other things, it must be assumed that the offender is permanently untreatable. And this is precisely what is being disputed in the trial. In this case, the prosecution is seeking lifelong preventive detention and is attempting to argue that while the diagnosed disorders might explain certain aspects of the crime, They do not explain the murders themselves. In doing so, it seeks to have Thomas classified as permanently untreatable. The majority of the court, however, sees it differently. The presiding judge later explains that the requirement of permanent untreatability has not been met. Therefore, life imprisonment cannot be imposed. The trial is difficult for the relatives to endure. Simona's mother and sister avoid looking at Thomas. Simona's brother is only able to make it into the courtroom for the sentencing. Before that, he cannot bear to sit in the same room as his sister's murderer. Carla's parents are also present. They have lost not only their daughter, but also their two grandsons, Dion and Devin. The lawyer representing the bereaved families later describes how they have withdrawn from society and barely participate in daily life anymore. Shortly before the trial, Thomas sends letters to the victims' families. The content strikes them as rather strategic, and every letter says almost the same thing. It's hard to detect any genuine compassion in them. On March 16, 2018, the Lensburg District Court hands down its verdict. Thomas N. is sentenced to life imprisonment. In addition, the court orders his detention under the ordinary detention regime. This means that even after serving his prison sentence, Thomas may remain in custody if he continues to be considered dangerous. A life sentence of preventive detention, however, is not imposed. Thomas appears outwardly calm in response to the verdict. Observers report that he sits in the courtroom with his head bowed and his eyes closed. After the verdict, however, both sides file appeals. On December 13, 2018, the Aargau Higher Court upholds the order of ordinary preventive detention. This brings the case to a legal close. For the family members, this does nothing to change what happened. Carla, Dion, Devin, and Simona were killed in their own home on December 21, 2015. Their deaths remain a profound loss for their family to this day. And that brings us to the end of today's video. I hope that Simona's loved ones and the Schauer family are doing as well as can be expected under the circumstances, and that they're able to lead a decent life. What are your thoughts on today's case? Feel free to share your opinions in the comments. By doing so, you're also supporting the channel. Thanks in advance. Other than that, there isn't much more to say. Tomorrow, at noon or in the evening, or whenever you happen to watch the video, and I hope we'll see each other again in the next video. Until then, ciao everyone.